Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this April campaigns breakfast. My name is Sofia Parent. For those who don't know me, I'm part of the Sustainable Food Places team at Sustain, and I'm joined by my Sustainable Food Places colleagues, Vera Zakharov and Ren Piercy. If you guys want to say hello, introduce yourselves.
Morning, everyone. I'm Ren, Local Action Officer for Sustainable Food Places. I think I've met most of you, but if not, welcome.
And Vera, we're just putting you on the spot just as you joined.
That's fine. I had some technical issues with my Wi-Fi. Hi, I'm Vera. I'm the Local Action Coordinator for Sustainable Food Places, working on Sugar Smart and Good Food Movement building.
Brilliant.
And supporting the Brighton and Hove campaign pilot.
Brilliant. So before we get started, I would just like to run through a few housekeeping points. I know we're all Zoomified and very used to this by now, but here we go. This session is being recorded, and the recording and presentations will be sent to you by email after this session and will be available on the SFP website later today. You can leave questions for our presenters in the chat box, as well as any links to stories, to your projects, or any other useful resources you want to share with everyone here. And to get the chat started, why not use the chat to say hello, introduce yourselves, say where you're from, and in the tradition of these campaigns breakfasts, why not tell everyone what you're looking forward to eat or drink when you go out to a cafe or restaurant again. And I'll start. I'm in South London, and the thing I'm really looking forward to is an espresso in a Portuguese cafe in the company of a friend. We have an area called Little Portugal in the south of London, an area where lots of Portuguese people settled since the 70s. It's full of cafes and restaurants. Nothing fancy, but here we go. We got used to the simple pleasures over the last year. So the theme for this campaign's breakfast is food and climate. It's a chance for you to learn from campaigns and projects tackling greenhouse gas emissions from food, but also to help us to develop a new Sustainable Food Places campaign on food and climate. In the first part of the session, you'll hear from my colleague Ruth Westcott. She's the Food and Climate Coordinator at Sustain. She'll give us an overview of the big three themes on food and climate, so the big three areas of action at the local level, and she'll let us know a little bit about the toolkit she's been developing. And next, we'll hear from pilot campaigns and projects from the network. We'll hear from Gemma Burley from Cambridge Sustainable Food and the pilot campaign they've been developing there to reduce meat consumption. We'll hear from Vicky Hurd, my colleague at Sustain, who will talk to us about a new exciting peri-urban farming project we have ongoing in various areas of the country. And finally, we'll hear from Ali Ghanimi from the Brighton and Hove Food Partnership, another pilot, this time on food use. And this is quite a short session for such a big and important theme, but if you're interested in learning more about the work happening in the city of Cambridge, which is home to several projects and businesses tackling climate change, we're going to have a Food Learning Forum network event at the end of this month. And my Sustain colleague Cecily, who's organizing this meeting, will circulate the details on the chat if you're interested. So you're more than welcome to sign up for that one as well. And this event will create more of a space for sharing, reflection, insight on how to embed climate change at all levels and connect climate, food, and social justice. So sign up for that as well. And then in the second part of the session, it's your chance to help us shape a new food and climate campaign for the network. And Ruth will give us all a link for a Miro board which is something you might be familiar with it by now, which is a virtual whiteboard where you can leave your notes on campaign objectives, but also to help us with an analysis of strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats for each of the big 3 campaign themes. And don't worry, this won't be the last opportunity for you to be involved in the development of a new food and climate campaign for the network. In fact, we're looking for a handful of members to help us in key moments of campaign development, from writing down the aims, objectives, and strategy of the campaign to reading and commenting on the website, branding, and the assets we prepare. So if you're interested, please get in touch with myself or Ruth. We're looking for a variety of geographies, and we can make a contribution towards your time, because we do value your contribution. We want this to be co-created, and we understand you have packed agendas and lots on your plate. So we do want to compensate for your time. And I'll stop here, and I would like to welcome Ruth to give us an overview.
Brilliant. Thanks, Sophia. Morning, everybody. It's really nice to see so many faces that I recognise. If you don't know me already, my name's Ruth Westcott and I work at Sustain on climate change and also fish. So it was great to see some people in the comments saying they're looking forward to fish and chips, and so many people looking forward to beer. Definitely where I feel like I am at the moment. Okay, so I've been working on climate change for just nearly a year now at Sustain, and I wanted to give you a bit of an overview about what Sustain is going to be campaigning on, because the dream scenario is that the local campaign would fit really nicely into that, and we can have a kind of beautiful pincer movement of local campaigns feeding into the action that we're sort of calling for at a national level. So the first thing is going to be procurement, for sure. So at a national level, we're going to be calling for the government buying standards to be improved, to be net zero proofed, and to be much more favourable to high quality and sustainable UK producers. And I don't know if anybody caught that country file on Sunday night, but that was very well set out there. It was a bit by British, as you'd expect from country file, rather than by sustainable. But you know, the idea was to get the message out there, so it did that very well, I think. We're also doing a lot of work on farming policy, which Vicky does a lot more than me, and trying to make agro-ecological farming the norm. And so that will build in to, that fits very much into our climate objectives. We're trying to make the case that we shouldn't have farming sitting in one slot and then nature conservation in another, and never the twain shall meet. It's about farming systems that build good soils and agroecology. We will also be doing some looking or investigating into what a fiscal measure around climate change might look like. So certainly not a meat tax as such, because it has a lot of political, it's a very difficult politically. And when it was postured a few months ago, it was, you know, the government issued a press release to say there is no way we are considering a meat tax. So it's not popular, but it would be something around perhaps VAT just on factory farmed meat, which would exempt meat which meets higher standards, and at least do some modelling or posture that just to get the conversation started, even if we don't think it's winnable at this point. We're also doing a little bit around other taxes, which is a snacks tax or something, a development or the next stage of the sugary drinks tax, and making a very clear climate case about why junk food, very heavily processed food laden with sugar and palm oil, is a disaster for biodiversity, because we don't think that the climate case about junk food is being made clearly enough at the moment. Okay. So that's Sustain overall. In terms of our work with local authorities and on a local level, I did a piece of work which I think you're all probably familiar with, like at the tail end of last year, where I looked at the climate action plans of all the councils in the UK. So far, 2/3 of councils have declared a climate, sorry, 3/4 of councils have declared a climate and nature emergency, and over half have released an action plan to say how they're going to address it. So we analysed all the published action plans at that point, which was 92, and we found that only 13 of those mentioned food in a way that we thought was adequate considering the scale of the emergency. Only 20% mentioned procurement, about 30% mentioned food waste, which was actually the best covered of all of the issues. And we identified kind of 3 key areas where councils can have an influence over climate-related food emissions in their area. And we will lead on to talking about those a bit more. It's food waste, land use and procurement. And of course, the relative importance of those 3 will depend on the rurality and urban nature of the council and the kind of council. So without further ado, I'll leave it there and let's hear a bit more about those 3 issues in detail. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. Just before we go to our 3 presentations, there's a question for you on the chat, Ruth. Can you say which 13 mentioned food? Question from Amanda.
Not off the top of my head, but I'll drop it in the chat. It was quite a mixture across the country and quite a mixture of different types of councils, which was quite good to see. Not always the ones, you know, I'll drop them in the chat.
Brilliant, thank you. So Amanda, watch out for the response in the chat. And without further ado, let's hear from pilots and other projects on the ground. Gemma, would you like to start?
Thanks, Sophia. Morning, everyone. I'm just going to share my screen with you. Okay, so thanks for the invitation today. We've been busy working behind the scenes with Sophia for a few months now, getting together to start to examine what the meat and dairy reduction campaign that we'll be running and testing in Cambridge could look like. So yeah, really pleased to share with you where we've got to so far. We've been, as have many partnerships, we've been working on climate and food for a while now. And this meat and dairy reduction campaign is really the second part of a climate change focus that we've had over the last year. So last year, in the autumn, we did a campaign around food waste reduction with residents, which was successful. We've had some kind of good points and also some learning points from it, as you always do. And it's helping us to kind of set the scene for this next campaign around meat and dairy and climate. There's also quite a lot of work going on in Cambridge more broadly on climate through the universities. And also we recently had a new climate change charter launched by the City Council, which is encouraging businesses, households, community groups all to sign up to understand their carbon footprint first of all, and then to take action to reduce it. And we actually provided support on the food aspect of that charter. So that's a new thing for Cambridge, which appears to be really popular at the moment. So we're looking at kind of working on the back of that too. And we're also working on a climate change module for our business awards scheme at the moment, which will help businesses to, again, to understand their carbon footprint and to take action to reduce it. So lots of work going on climate and food, which is fantastic. So the Climate Diets campaign is all focused around encouraging people to think about climate when they're making their food choices, and really aims to normalise the climate diet, which is what we're currently terming it. The kind of the key message in the strapline isn't yet set in stone, but the idea is to try to normalise this climate diet, so the planetary diet, which is recommended by Sustain and also Eating Better, and looking at reducing consumption of meat and dairy products to around 70 grams a day by 2030. So this is all about kind of less meat and dairy, but also better meat and dairy. So that's our key objective for the campaign. And the message really is about the health of the planet, but also your own health. There's clearly a lot of opportunities here as the kind of the plant-based movement has taken off over the last few years. It's in the media a lot. It feels like a really good time to be talking about this. You know, with Brexit as well, potentially there's opportunities around local and sustainable products supporting British farmers. So it feels like a really nice time to be doing this. Cambridge is also, we hope, set to sign the Nottingham Declaration, the Glasgow Declaration on Climate. So yeah, we'll be looking to knit in with that as well. So through working closely with Sophia, we've been doing a lot of work to develop this campaign. One of the first things that we did together was to start to understand our kind of spectrum of support. So looking at who are our allies, who is opposing potentially the work that we would like to do on this, and trying to identify kind of local and national organisations, individuals that might fall within this kind of spectrum of support. So some of the active allies we've recognised in Cambridge are the university caterers, who have removed a lot of red and processed meat from their menus. With the location of Cambridge surrounded by the beautiful fens, veg growers as well, a kind of active ally potentially in this campaign. Looking more opposition, clearly kind of meat and dairy farmers, perhaps not active opposition, but more passive opposition. And the wider meat industry clearly is at odds with this campaign around reducing meat and dairy. We also looked at particular kind of target groups in the population and felt that potentially often seems to be older men, maybe less interested in switching to a lower meat and dairy diet. My dad would be a really good example of that. I'm getting there slowly with him. So we started with that exercise, and we also started to sort of unpick some of the underlying beliefs around meat and dairy in diets. So just a couple of examples here. So one of the things we identified was around meat being seen as cheaper. I mean, obviously it is, and especially the kind of factory there is this perception that plant-based is in some way is more expensive, but potentially is perhaps inaccessible in other ways. It's perhaps more potentially a class issue in some ways. And also supermarkets are charging a premium for plant-based ready meals. And plant-based dishes often do require more ingredients to make them tasty than just having meat and 2 veg. So I think there's this perception that that plant-based is more expensive. However, if you're looking at comparing a meat-based meal with a plant-based one, we know that often the plant-based is much, much cheaper. So it's really trying to sort of challenge those perceptions and to try and address some of these areas where it's leading potentially to people eating less plant-based food. So a solution here potentially around challenging this meat is cheaper belief is around promoting home cooking and simple recipes for people that they can do at home that will be a plant-based version perhaps of a meaty favourite, and also highlighting the cost comparison to show people that actually, yeah, you could be saving a lot of money. You could be feeding your kids for 20p per portion per meal compared to a meat-based dish. Another example here around the kind of the men needing meat camp. So this kind of macho view of meat, the kind of view that perhaps you can't get enough protein from plant-based diets. And we know this is really causing a real sort of skew in the figures in terms of number of the gender of people taking up plant-based eating. So around 70% of those people are female. So clearly here, some quite deep held beliefs, we think, but through finding male role models, potentially athletes that are plant-based predominantly, would help to dispel some of these myths around meat and the protein content. Some of the action areas for the campaign, we've been looking at how we engage with the wider community through, for example, online resources, different challenges, publicity stunts, those sorts of things. Looking at schools, education settings, wider retail, how can we work with businesses to encourage them to promote plant-based, businesses, workplaces, just sort of trying to map out where the kind of potential opportunities are in Cambridge and potentially nationally as well. I mentioned at the beginning that this is the second phase of a climate change campaign around food. So this is just some snapshots from our food waste campaign, which is all about food waste and climate. So we learned a lot from that campaign. It was the first time we've done an online campaign, obviously because of COVID. So I feel like we've learned a lot about technology, especially. And it was great to test out some of these ideas. So we did, some cook-alongs. We did food from the fridge drawer, food that's going off in your fridge. What can you do with it? Tips, recipes, kids' activities. And we ran a challenge as well for people to measure their food waste before getting involved in the campaign. Listening and reviewing a lot of our resources, joining our cookers, those sorts of things, and then measuring their waste afterwards. The campaign as a whole we felt was successful, but we had real issues with tracking data. So I'd say that was a key kind of learning point for us was, okay, how can we actually encourage people to measure food waste, for example, but also how can we get them to measure meat and dairy reduction? So this is something we're kind of wrestling with a bit at the moment, whether we encourage people to keep food diaries of their meat and dairy consumption, but really welcome any ideas from the network around measuring that, because it can be a difficult one. So that's the kind of frame for the campaign for the meat and dairy will be, we think, predominantly online. We've tested a lot of this stuff already, but clearly with that messaging around meat and dairy, dispelling some of those myths and pushing it out through some of our allies and active networks in Cambridge. So overall, we are busy developing this behind the scenes. We will be meeting with other cities, we think, soon to kind of share ideas and feedback, which will be great, the other pilot projects. We're looking at rolling this out. I think Sustain are looking at rolling this out to the rest of the network towards the end of the year, following the test in Cambridge. And our main focus for the sort of early summer will be around community. So looking at how we can encourage households, community groups to reduce meat and dairy consumption. And then we'll be following that up with a focus on business action on meat and dairy in the autumn. That's all from me.
Fab, thanks, Gemma. There weren't a whole lot of questions in the chat, but Sam did mention it already, but about the working with the uni students and the meat reduction in the canteens. I wonder if you wanted to just touch on that a bit, if you were directly involved in that.
Yeah, so to be honest, we're regularly in touch with the university, but it was something they developed their own sustainable food policy a couple of years ago, which was very progressive in terms of taking red meat off the menu, as well as lots of other actions. So they didn't actually really need any encouragement for us, which is fantastic. I love it when that happens. So we are, kind of getting in touch with them to see, what can we learn from their experiences, to see, how are they kind of nudging people towards more sustainable options, and, the kind of alternatives that they're providing now that they have taken red meat and a lot of processed meat off the menu.
Brilliant. That's nice when people do the work for you. A question from Emily about measuring meat and dairy consumption and how you can tell the campaign's making a difference. You did obviously talk about difficulties of measuring, but I wonder if you have any points on that, recommendations.
Yeah, I think it's a really difficult one. So we, I think I mentioned this kind of food diary idea where we ask people to talk about what they buy before and after the campaign, after they've been involved in the campaign, so we can compare the difference. We had issues with that with the food waste campaign because we got some data through from people, but they didn't always tell us the end result. So it was really hard to know what the improvement was. Clearly sign-ups, number of sign-ups and the kind of pledge based system could work. And also look into some of the work that Sustain's done around, for example, the Veg Cities platform, where people are actually logging their action and the savings made. So yeah, there's quite a bit more work I think we need to do on that. And yeah, really keen to learn from the network on this about how we can make it easy for us, but also for the people taking part to measure.
Yeah, thank you. Always difficult. Interesting question from Amanda. Did you make contact with many health professionals to see what they're doing at home as well as work?
This is again something we need to dig into a bit more. So we've recently had a new contact from Public Health join our partnership board. So this is one of the things we'd like to follow up with her to see, what are their perspectives, what are their learnings from their profession, and how can we embed that in the campaign as well. Definitely.
Brilliant, thanks, Gemma. Sophia, I don't know, there are a couple more questions, but I don't know if we need to move on to the next presentation.
No, I think this is important. The questions that are coming through, and they're very much on our mind. So, what about in the areas where meat and dairy production is economically important? And Duncan about the different arguments we have in our area around sheep farming and so on, and that's why it's so important that we have different views from the network, and we know how tricky some of the campaign messaging will be if we don't have this into consideration. And someone else in the chat mentioned stuff around processed food, and as we said before, factory farming and low standards food. So it's very important that moving forward in the campaign that we design, we talk about less and better meat, and not just a reduction in meat and dairy. And I think that's central to everything we'll do moving forward, because we know that animal farming should not be seen in isolation. It's so important to, for example, connecting people to the land. Someone was telling before about this really interesting project happening in Wales, seeing farming with other co-benefits, and one of them was encouraging young people to stay in the land. So we have to take that into consideration. So moving forward, we do want to measure the benefits of reducing meat and dairy in the diet, and we have ways to calculate that. But also we do want to have better meat and dairy, and then a factory farming. I don't know if Ruth or Vicky, you want to say anything else about this, and particularly Vicky, you're our head of farming at Sustain, and this has been your bread and butter for decades.
Thanks, Sophia. Yeah, we don't have very much time to talk about it, but yeah, you're absolutely right. It's critical to get it right. But people have been working. I'm sorry, I've got a drill right behind me. People have been working for many years on thinking about what better means and how to promote that to the different people sourcing food, how to talk about that with different audiences and people on different income levels, the gender issues. So there's a lot of work out there to draw on. But it's not easy, but we definitely have to think of rural incomes and rural cohesion, but also from the perspective of getting more mixed farms and agro-ecological systems, which can use livestock as part of the fertility and even weed management, things like that. So making more integrated farming systems more supported from government, which is the area I work on. Yeah, probably I'll say.
And I've also, thank you for circulating some of the Eating Better resources here. Eating Better is an alliance who works precisely on less and better meat. This is all they do, and Sustain is one of the members of this alliance, but it is an alliance that is rapidly growing. And they're here, they're listening to the conversation because they have resources to produce a few assets for work at the local level. So I invite you all to have a look at these resources, but also think of, if we're going to move forward with a Less and Better Meat campaign at the local level, what kinds of assets, toolkits, buying guides we need, and they will help us. Do you want to add anything, Ruth? Or shall we move on? And we'll have a bit of time at the end, as I said, to jot down all these thoughts in a SWOT analysis. So moving on, Vicky, would you like to talk to us about the peri-urban farming project?
Sophia, I didn't tell you, I do have some slides. Can I share them? Is that right?
Yes, absolutely.
Thanks.
Go ahead and share.
Oh, I can't find it now. Oh, never mind. I can't find it. I thought I was going to be able to share the slides with you.
We can swap things around and invite Ali to do her presentation.
Oh no, I've got it. Sorry, it wasn't up. Fine.
Brilliant.
Okay, I'm actually doing this. Can you see that slide now?
Yes.
Right. So the potential of peri-urban farming. I'm actually here in place of Rob Logan, who actually do another talk this morning in Brighton, I believe, or talking to people in Brighton. So I'm here in lieu of him. So imagine it's Rob talking, who's got a huge amount of experience looking at how peri-urban farming and urban food systems can deliver for health, for communities, for economy, and for the environment. So he's brilliant, and he started in January. So I'm speaking on his behalf. So I was going to quickly talk about what the peri-urban is, why we're focusing on agro-ecological farming and fringe farming, why land is the barrier, what we're doing on this over the next year, and the emerging themes and council actions. And what we're talking about is land in and around the edge of cities and towns, so to say, and it aims to increase, we want to increase access to land for agroecological farming at the edge of UK cities and urban areas. Some of the most fertile soils in the UK on the urban fringe, and as such, they contain an awful lot of carbon. So we've got to think about the carbon within the soil and also above ground in terms of storing, sequestering more carbon in order to tackle climate change. And it's a real opportunity here. Unlike possibly thinking about the wider farming hinterland and farming in rural areas, which local authorities may not feel they have much opportunity to influence directly through policy, they do have an opportunity to influence what happens in the peri-urban areas and urban areas in terms of use of that soil to capture carbon and have many other co-benefits. Obviously, it's protected by the Green Belt policy to protect the urban expansion and sealing of soil. And it's worth remembering that 50 years ago, many market gardens ringed many cities and they've closed, but that doesn't mean we couldn't recreate and have a renaissance in peri-urban market gardens. And it's partly to do with the model that supermarkets have in sourcing in a centralized way from very centralized regional distribution centers that have very strict due diligence, fit their just-in-time models, but they probably don't fit a future farming model, which is about sourcing closest to where it's logical for you to source food from and building up agroecological systems to feed people wherever they are at affordable levels. We're talking about agroecological fringe farming, which integrates ecological and social principles. I don't need to go into all of this. We can share the slides afterwards, but it's really critical. We recognize that there is probably a role for the kind of vertical farming, high-tech farming, very low land take farming that a lot of investors are very excited about. And there's a lot of money flying out there. We don't think that provides the multiple co-benefits that we're talking about, one of which is making sure the soil can actually retain the carbon in its structure, and we can build above ground rich carbon, for instance, bushes, trees, plants, what's it, not annual, I can't think of the word for the opposite annual, anyway, plants that just stay there for a long time to build in carbon into the system as well as provide healthy food. And agroecologically, the movement on agricultural agroecology is very much about building on practice that everybody can support each other. It's sort of very much about open source, building science by practice, all sorts of things. So there's lots of really strong co-benefits from agroecology. That's why we're talking about that in this project. And I've already talked about fringe farming. For instance, when we looked at London, 59% of London's green belt is agricultural land, and a lot of it's arable or disused. And if we converted even a small amount to high productivity vegetables, we could produce a huge amount more fresh vegetables for the near markets, which are obviously very intense in London and in cities. So you can build economic outcomes from fringe farming, such as contract services, training, advice, skills and enterprise development, community development and education, getting people on the fringe farming sites to learn about food growing, and skills development to actually start their own enterprises elsewhere. And that's happening already. We know one organically in London came and spoke to us about what they're doing with trainees. It's fantastic. And then you've got the environmental reduction, air pollution, biodiversity and carbon sequestration. And there is increased demand for land, and there's increased demand for local food, and there's an increased amount of growers, a generation of growers. The Land Workers Alliance is one great example of that. It's growing fantastically. If you don't know the Land Workers Alliance, do look at their website. Brilliant initiative to get people growing and farming everywhere. And one of the key barriers to them doing that is access to land and access to affordable land. And so we want to see more land available. Look at those barriers. In this, we've got 12 months funding for this project, identify land opportunities and local actions, and develop local and national policy. And we're working in 4 cities initially, which is Bristol, London, Glasgow and Sheffield. And so working with partners in those 4 cities. And we're also working with Shared Assets, the brilliant organisation looking at land in terms of building up our data and our knowledge and our research on what can be done in those 4 cities. And we're working with Land Workers Alliance on a practitioners forum. And the first practitioners forum is happening in the next couple of weeks. I'll share it on the chat. So we're having practitioners forums over the life of the project. So people who are actually doing it or want to do it can come and talk about real practical and pragmatic issues that they're facing, and other people can help them overcome. So we're going to have a briefing, events and action plans in all 4 cities. And as I said, the forum, and build on that learning to have national asks and national campaigns. Just looking at Bristol, this is the one where we're having our first meeting. And obviously Bristol Council has big plans to have for going green, climate change pledges. And Sheffield wants to become a zero carbon city by 2030. The London plan, good growth objectives, to have a healthy city, increasing efficiency and resilience and healthy food in London. So all 4 cities have been chosen. They're on different stages of looking at how food can be integrated into a climate and nature plan, which is fantastic. And it's really exciting. It's moving really fast, and Rob's rushed off his feet, to be frank. So emerging issues, obviously, the things that we really need to talk about is access to land. Where is it? Who owns it? Can we have some of it, please? And that's one of the things that we need to be talking to the councils in the meetings that we're holding in the 4 areas. And so we're inviting councillors and council staff in all different departments to come and talk to us about that. And the first one will be really interesting to see how that works. We'll be championing agroecology as an approach, as opposed to high-tech, high investment, expensive, low employment approaches, and ideally with long-term leases and access, so we can actually build real resilience and carbon in the system, as well as food growing. Possibly an investment fund for green new jobs in these sites, and using critically procurement of the regionally grown foods. And some projects are already doing that in peri-urban and urban areas, getting the food they grow into local schools. And having food hubs, local councils could actually invest in food hubs, which would help that distribution of food from the peri-urban food, and possibly from other SMEs in the area, in the rural area, and help them with training, education and marketing as well. So lots of opportunities for council to help with this, specifically around peri-urban food, but linking to wider food issues and farming issues. Sorry, that's not me, says Fiona, I should say Vicky. I'm Vicky, V-I-C-K-I, at sustainable.org, but Rob is the man to be working on this, and do liaise with him if you're interested. And he's developing more carefully the set of asks for councils, which I've just seen, and it's looking really good. And so we're going to be sharing an initial draft of that in Bristol in a few weeks. And as I said, so there's Bristol meeting, and then there's the peri-urban practitioners forum, and I'll put the link in the chat to that. So anybody who wants to look on the website what we're doing and talk to the different partners, it's a really exciting project for me, because it's going beyond farming. I work on farming and supply chains, but this really touches on the whole of Sustain's project areas, you know, healthy food, access to food for people on no incomes, children's food, training, advice, all sorts of things. So it's really cross issue and very exciting to be working on. So I'll end it there. Thank you. And apologies for the drilling. I hope you could hear me okay.
Thanks, Vicky. Couldn't hear the drilling at all. That was really interesting. We didn't have many questions in the chat, but Pearl made a great comment that their consultation was really positive. One of the negative comments was, it's a city, not a farm, which I thought was good. I've just got a question about how receptive the local authorities have been with this project? Have they been quite nervous, or has it kind of been received quite positively?
It really depends on the department in a way. We've got contacts in Bristol who are very interested. We're working with Steph, Land Workers Alliance, the Bristol Food Growers, and she's working with parts of the local authority department who work on allotments, very keen and very interested. But other departments, such as those that hold on to assets, you know, local authority assets and land, that's harder to get to grips with, harder to get them excited. And that's the aim, to get the different departments who could benefit and could support the work coming to the room and getting to talk about it. And we're initially doing research in those areas. So we'll have a briefing that everybody will get in advance to look at. So we won't be starting from scratch saying there's no research, we don't know what land is available. That won't be the point of the meeting. It'll be exploring what we found out and going from there. But working with the local authorities and getting them excited about how this can contribute to their climate and nature pledges.
Yeah, because it works across so many departments with the local authorities.
Yeah, I've noticed somebody's asked about contaminated land.
Yeah,
Definitely an issue. Yes, and that'll be something we'll be talking with the local authorities about. And there's lots of experience of working on that with the various food projects that are across the country, like growing communities, for instance, in North London have done a lot of work on that.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Vicky. Amanda's asked if this can be part of the economic development or job development strategies.
Absolutely. I think I mentioned regeneration. I should have probably mentioned it more. There's real opportunity to see this as an opportunity to reskill and build enterprises and high yielding and profitable enterprises. We're not just talking, you know, people scrabbling around in the dirt. It's really about growing, you know, lots of food in agro-ecological ways, but you can actually grow an awful lot in a small area of land, especially fruit and vegetables. It's a really productive system once you've got it right. So you need that training and skills. And people, as I mentioned, Organic Lee, they've trained a lot of unemployed people to go on and start sites of their own. So that's a real opportunity for regeneration and employment and training. We'll be drawing on those examples and challenging the council to see how they can do that at a local level.
So exciting. That's great piece of work. Vera, you have a question. I wonder if you want to just ask it.
Sure. Thanks. Yeah, no, just a question, Vicky, about when to involve communities and sort of community consultation. Because it's like that, you know, there's the kind of more interior conversations with councils, food partnerships, but then there's also community groups kind of coming together and being like, there's a piece of land, what can we do with it? So it kind of what's the order?
Yeah, that's critical, and that's why we're working with the partners that we've got in the 4 cities, because they're very connected with the local communities and are very aware of all those groups working. In fact, the last meeting we had with Bristol, we were talking about that, and they will be invited, you know, if it's appropriate, they want to come to these meetings, but we'll be that's very much about working with the partners that we have in the 4 cities initially, about how they're working with local, and they know far more than we could ever sitting in London of the kind of things that are going on at a local level and local communities. And the key is to make that happen and make a movement, a fringe farming movement within each city or within each urban area, and looking at that potential. So a very good point. Yeah.
Thanks, Vicky. And before we move on, there's an interesting theme happening in the chat where there seems to be kind of questions about how urban local authorities seem to be a bit more positive or receptive to alternative agricultural initiatives. And I just wondered if you've come across this and your thoughts on this.
I haven't personally, but Rob might have done, or other people working on it might have done. I think possibly the more rural based local authorities are slightly nervous about, you know, challenging the farming in their area. I don't know, I haven't really thought about this. I mean, one of the issues that arises is that issue of competition for, I guess, if you're supporting an initiative, a very big, a large scale initiative in a peri-urban area producing horticulture, how could that possibly be competing with a food grower in your area? I don't know, I haven't really thought about that enough, but it's definitely something to consider. And I think the other issue is that lots of local authorities have county farms, the small holding estate, which lots of you will already be aware of. And so looking at whether that is being used to really sort of generate good food for local people and in ways that are good for the local environment. So looking at the county farm structure will be part of the discussion as well. And that's particularly important for new entrants. That's the point of the smallholding estate, get new entrants getting into farming and going up the ladder of sort of experience and size of farm, for instance. So that's something to think about, how that could be brought into the mix.
Great, thanks, Vicky. It's so interesting, and I wish you could talk about this for longer.
Yeah, there's a lot to talk about. That's why we're hopefully going beyond 1 year, but the four events that we'll be running will be really rich and lots of stuff that we will share the findings.
Brilliant, thank you. We'll make sure that's circulated around the Sustainable Food Places network. Sophia, should we move on to the next?
Yeah, we could probably spend the 3 days on each of the 3 themes. We do have to move on, I'm afraid, but I'm also thinking what else we can do next, because there's lots of interest, lots of questions, and all these big areas of action deserve closer exploration. So keep talking, keep chatting. Ali, you're next, and after Ali and questions for Ali, we'll have our Miro whiteboard for some fun.
Great. Hi everyone. Just sharing my screen. Bear with me and get my presentation slides up. Here we go. Hope you can all see that. So I'm from Brighton Hove Food Partnership. We're very pleased that last year, back end of last year, we got the first Gold Sustainable Food Cities Award. So here's our new updated presentation, all sparkly and gold, just to show that off a little bit. So what I'm going to talk about this morning is our food use campaign. So we have tried to take a citywide approach to reducing food waste. So I'm just going to talk through that. But first of all, I'll just give you a bit of an overview of Brighton and Hove. I'm sure many of you will know the city well. We're a tourist city, quite a small city actually, on the south coast of England. A big tourist destination now. I can remember back in the day when the tourism used to sort of start and end in the summer and the spring, but now it's kind of all year round. So we get, in the context of food waste, we have 11 million visitors a year, day trippers a year. We've got, I think the last I looked on TripAdvisor, we've got well over 1,000 restaurants. So we've got a population of about 270,000 people and a hell of a lot of restaurants. So you can imagine some of the challenges around food waste. We've also added to that got a student population. We have 2 universities, something in the region of 35,000 students. And with the high cost of housing here, because we're near enough to London, we've got a massive sort of housing issue, which caused a lot of people to, clump together in houses of multiple occupancy. So again, another sort of challenge in terms of food waste, because we've got lots of people living together in quite, poor housing with very few places to kind of properly store food. Added to that, surprisingly, given that we were the first, had the first green council in the city, we don't have a domestic food waste collection. So this sort of sets the scene a little bit about how challenging it is to tackle food waste in the city. In terms of our approach then, one of the things that we're doing, and this got mentioned a little bit earlier, is we're trying to measure food waste, and that's really problematic for us. We've been trying very hard on this. Luckily, last year, our local council did a composition analysis of the domestic bin waste and found, quite depressingly, but not unusually, that about 1/3 of all the stuff that goes into the household bin waste is food. And well, just over 1/3 actually, and about half of all that was food that never even left its wrapping. So we've got a bit of a problem there, but at least we've been able to quantify that a little bit. Some of the other, obviously, as I said before, we've got well over 1,000 restaurants and food businesses, as well as the big city caterers and the universities, etc., and all the schools. So it's been really difficult for us to measure the food waste. Obviously, I can't sit and phone 1,000 businesses, and they probably wouldn't know their food waste measurements anyway. So one approach we've taken is to try and contact the the network of commercial businesses that do food waste collections and then sort of take that miles away to these anaerobic digesters. So at least that's kind of a bit more sustainable. But as you can imagine, they're commercial businesses. They don't really like giving you that information, although we have had a little bit of success. And I'm very willing to talk to anyone who's interested in this in a bit more detail about that. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to target 20 food organisations across the city, including the schools and the universities, to try and see if we can get them to do food waste audits. So that's part of the campaign that we're doing. But as you can imagine, it's been really, really tricky at the moment with the pandemic, because a lot of food businesses are just, you know, really struggling. They've got staff on furlough, etc. Some of them are even closed. So we're hoping to do that sort of later this year. We're also quite lucky because in our food partnership, we've got what we call a caterers network, or a good food procurement group. This has been really useful for us because we've got about 50 organisations. So these are the large caterers, the hospitals, the schools and universities, etc. And they don't always engage, but we've tried to sort of bring them together to look at, you know, best practice around sustainable food, you know, healthy food. And so we've been working with them around food waste. And as many of you probably know, at the beginning of March, there was the first ever National Food Waste Action Week that RAP led on. And we worked with them and got them to start looking at the resources that down here, like Guardians of Grub have got, for example, to how to measure and reduce your food waste. So that was really helpful. And in the past, we've done kind of like citywide events with food businesses to get them to think about their food waste as well. And another sort of good opportunity that we had this year is that we got the council to agree to update their good food standards. You can sort of see a snapshot here. And this really is about sort of just, you know, better buying practices, more sustainable food, thinking about climate change in food when they commission catering and, you know, food supplies. But we managed to get some stuff around having an annual plan to reduce your food waste, etc. in there, and to like do regular food waste audits. So that's been quite useful. And then in terms of campaigning, so again, you know, we sort of found out about this first ever Food Waste Action Week that RAP were doing, got in straight away and said, can we be a strategic partner? So they were great. They really supported us. We supported them. And so we did a big citywide campaign, although it was quite difficult because it was in the middle of lockdown. We did a lot of stuff around social media. You know, we updated all our web resources. We worked very closely with RAP and made sure that we were really like sharing and promoting sort of food waste and climate change message. And because RAP told us that young people are more likely to waste a lot of food, we targeted our two universities and young people generally. And we got a student intern, Alvin, who helped us create this little video of a slice of bread who's been, you know, completely neglected for a takeaway and is feeling quite traumatized by it and had to sort of sit in therapy. So we thought we'd try to sort of like, you know, come up with fun ideas to try and sort of promote this link between food waste and climate change. And because our city council don't do food waste collections, they do at least fund us to do a community compost scheme. So this is Rosie, our community compost lead here, putting some, you know, veg in one of the bins. So we have about 40 community compost schemes around the city. So we promote those and we get funding to do it. And we also try and get people, if they've got like gardens and outside space, to do their own home composting as well. So that helps a bit. And then lastly, to talk about our surplus food network. So again, we're a little bit unique in Brighton in that we've got 6 organisations all working together to try and intercept any surplus food from supermarkets, food businesses and farms, and to get that food to, you know, hungry people. So the vast amount of that surplus food is being, you know, instead of going in the bin, it goes to like emergency food projects. So we've got a big emergency food network in our city now of about 50 organisations, all helping people in food poverty. And we also have, in the past, we've done citywide events around, you know, promoting like surplus food and getting people to understand about food waste here. You can see people love to sort of dress up as fruit and veg and go out onto the streets. And we've got the gleaning network as well, of people that go onto farms and pick what the farmers, can't pick themselves, and make sure that it gets used. And up here you can see that we've also, through a European project, we got a project to actually take surplus food that's got a very short shelf life and can't get eaten, to sort of process it and make it last longer. So there's all sorts of things that we're doing to try and get as much food, surplus food, into that network as possible so we can use it. And last year we sort of saved well over 1,000 tons of surplus food and fed something like 62,000 or nearly 63,000 people. And we're sort of trying to promote that as well. So one of the things about the food use campaign is we're really trying to get the supermarkets to give us as much of their surplus food as possible. Quite depressingly, I think still a lot of it does go back to the digesters. So a bit of training and engagement there. And that's it really. Really keen to work with anyone out there who's doing stuff on food use and food waste as well. Love to sort of share ideas, because it is a really difficult one to work with. It's really difficult to do campaigning around this issue. That's it. I'll just stop sharing my screen. Happy to take any questions.
Fab, thanks Ali, that was really useful, and Brighton's always got so much going on, it's so impressive. There aren't many questions in the chat, but I'm quite interested to hear how you have engaged with young people, because I know everyone's quite keen to do this at the moment, and it seems like young people are quite engaged, but I was quite shocked to hear that that's the group that are wasting the most food.
Yeah, and that's, I think the group, RAP's analysis has showed that it's quite a complex picture. It's not just young people, but they tend to waste a lot. And I think when you add it to sort of like, we've got 2 universities here, when they're kind of living away from home, going back and forward, living in HMOs, it's not easy. What we found is that, when we work with students, they're very shocked. They're very shocked about the link between food waste and climate change. Obviously interested and quite easy to engage, or some of them were. But I think it's really about just lack of understanding and awareness. And also they're young, they probably don't have the same cooking skills as older people. So, it's just about sort of cluing them up really. So some of the things that we did is we couldn't do webinars, but we did like little YouTube videos and we tried to sort of promote them that way. So.
Brilliant. We've got a question from Amanda coming through, looking at how do we stop conflating the issues between, well, this is the age-old question, conflating the issues between food waste and emergency food provision, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely. We're really clear that they're 2 separate problems, and we're just kind of using it as a bit of a quick fix at the moment. Of course, we don't want food poverty, we want people to earn proper wages. And we don't want the supermarkets and food producers to be massively over supplying, particularly like foods like bread, that we can't, a lot of the time we can't get rid of anyway. It is an issue. But at the moment, particularly with the pandemic, it's just a fix that we need to sort of do.
Thanks, Ali.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a symptom rather than anything you have to tackle in isolation, and that's why it's so important that everything we do at the local level is matched with a national level action and campaigning. And Vera has been looking at this because she's our resident food waste expert. Do you want to say anything about how would we go about campaigning and program work at the national level?
Yeah, sure thing. I guess, Ali and I've been unpicking this a little bit. Just putting to one side, like the brilliant work that the likes of Feedback are doing on kind of whole systems analysis. I think there is a couple of things that can be done where it has an impact, especially on like cities and towns. One is actually for government to lead on making some of the reduction measures mandatory. The quartile commitment is still voluntary, and it's kind of too late for us to be doing that. And also for some of the larger retailers as well as food businesses to actually to measure their food waste and make the outcomes transparent. And part of that, I think, one of the things that smaller businesses struggle with, they can't afford auditing software and technologies in a way, because I think that market really needs to grow. and the bigger guys can really lead on that. So that's one thing. And I think the other thing is really just to actually really intervene where retailers are overselling. And making sure that retailers especially are incorporating food waste reduction messages all the time. You know, food waste reduction messaging needs to be constant. You can't just blip it one year and expect food waste to stay low. Two things.
Brilliant, thank you, Vera. And thank you again to our brilliant speakers, Ruth, Gemma, Vicky, Ali. We're well over time going into the second part of this session, but I felt I couldn't limit the discussion in any way. And I think it's been really fruitful. So moving on to the second part of the meeting, we have less than 15 minutes left to leave a few thoughts on a whiteboard. Ruth, please circulate a link to a Miro board. So you have a link in the chat. Please go there. If you need a password, here we go. Password is Gary Barlow. You can tell a lot about Ruth's personality by the password. But the idea is that we all go onto this collaborative platform and we leave ideas with post-its. And for those not familiar with this tech, do you want to say a few words about how it works, Ruth? And then let's give ourselves a good 15 minutes to leave comments there. And the other thing I wanted to say is that it will be there until the end of this week to allow others who couldn't join us today to leave any thoughts there. So Ruth, up to you.
Thanks, Sophia. Thanks so much, everybody. Yeah, it's over to you now. I can't wait to hear your thoughts about listening to those three topics, about what might make a really good campaign across the network. I don't want to talk too much because I'd rather just let you get in there. So in many ways, don't listen to me, just have a go and start leaving some comments. Just put in the chat anybody who's struggling to get access to the Miro board or anything, but I can see that there's people in there already. I suppose the only thing to say is, let's just think about the sort of size of the campaigns that we're running. For those newer to the network, the grants that are normally given out to places running campaigns is around the sort of 5,000 mark. And I mean, I was astonished with what those places have managed to do with that money, but that's the scale. And what we have to think about is where we get the biggest kind of bang for our buck locally for that size of campaign. It's also very, very much worth thinking that, you know, as Vera was saying at the end there, how can we make sure that we're maximized, that local campaigns contribute to a national conversation about policy change? So for example, the Sustainable Fish Cities campaign is trying to get as many businesses as possible to adopt sustainable fish. And at the same time, on a national level, I'm campaigning to get at the headquarters of very large companies, to get them to switch to sustainable fish across all their sites, wherever they are in the UK, whether they're in Fish City campaign places or not. So that works very well as a pincer movement. So that is worth thinking about. Hopefully it should be pretty straightforward otherwise. I mean, it's going to start getting a bit messy as you still start adding sticky notes in there. Just pile them up on top of each other and don't worry too much. We can unpick them. Yeah, I did also just want to say, I mean, the one question that we're grappling with, which would be good to have your thoughts on, is whether it's better to have one campaign that we really encourage as many people as possible to go for and get that a really big sort of what do they call it when you
Groundswell?
Yeah, which it's like the campaign where they have all the cyclists cycling through the city. Yeah, enough people locally that it would make a difference. So lots of places doing the same thing has a lot of benefits to national campaigning, and that kind of, yeah, that groundswell of support. On the other hand, you might just think, well, there's no way in our area will get any traction on less and better meat. Land use is our only hope, in which case it's better to do something which works locally than flog the sort of dead horse, as it were, of trying to get your schools to cut down on to, you know, do less and better meat. So it would be really good to hear your thoughts on that approach, on which works better. Yeah, I don't want to say two more really. I'd rather just let you drop your ideas in. Is everybody managing to use Miro okay?
Yeah, so you can click on the sticky note on the left-hand side of your screen and drag it to one of the boxes where you want to leave your comments. I'm going to stop the recording now, and